The chandelier above the Ashford ballroom held 12,000 crystal drops, and every one of them shivered when 400 guests began to laugh at the same time. Nia Whitfield stood alone in the middle of the marble floor, 20 steps from the small stage. She wore her sky blue cleaning uniform, the one with the small white patch on the chest that read, Ashford Building Services. Her hands were empty. Her mop bucket, her cart, and her radio were all still on the 47th floor, where she had been finishing the executive kitchen when the security guard came to get her. "Miss Whitfield, they're calling for you downstairs," he had said. "The boss wants you at the gala." She had thought it was a mistake. She had thought maybe a light had gone out, or maybe someone had spilled a drink and they needed her to bring towels. She had walked into the ballroom in her uniform with her sky blue rubber-soled shoes still slightly damp from the mop water. Then a man in a tan blazer had climbed onto the small stage, taken the microphone, and pointed at her. "Everyone," Preston Vance had said, smiling with all of his teeth, "please give a warm welcome to Miss Nia Whitfield, our very own cleaning staff, personally invited to the gala tonight by our beloved CEO as a fun little charity surprise." The laughter started in the front row and moved backward like a wave. It rolled past the round tables with their white linen and their tall vases of white roses. It passed the champagne flutes and the men in black tie and the women in ivory and gold. It rolled all the way to the doors at the back of the ballroom, where 2 Ashford Tower security guards stood watching with their hands folded behind their backs and their faces very carefully blank. 400 people were laughing at her. Nia felt the sound go through her ribs the way cold water goes through a thin coat. She felt her uniform shirt get very tight around the collar. She felt the toes of her rubber-soled shoes press into the marble as if her body wanted to run without asking her first. She did not run. She lifted her chin instead, and she looked up at the small stage, and she looked at the microphone on its silver stand, and she looked at the printed program lying open on the podium beside it. From 20 feet away she could read the 2 words that mattered most. Guest performance. Nia Whitfield had once been the top mezzo-soprano at the New England Conservatory. She had once sung Ave Maria from that same podium as a scholarship student, 10 years ago, in a borrowed black gown. She had walked away from all of it after her mother died, and she had never stood in front of a microphone since. She looked at the podium. She looked at the crowd. She looked at Mr. Julian Ashford, seated at the head table in a navy suit, his gray eyes wide with something that was not laughter but was not yet understanding. Then she walked toward the stage. The laughter did not stop right away. It got a little softer, the way laughter does when the person being laughed at refuses to leave. A few people at the back tables put their hands down. A woman in the 3rd row set her champagne flute on the tablecloth without looking at it. Preston Vance's smile stayed frozen on his face, but his eyes moved sideways to check the exits. Nia climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Her sky blue uniform caught the light from the chandelier and turned the color of a summer sky at noon. She walked past Preston without looking at him. She stopped in front of the microphone. She placed one hand on the silver stand to steady it, and she leaned in just close enough to speak. "Good evening," she said, and her voice was low and calm and warm. "My name is Nia Whitfield, and if you will let me, I would like to sing you one song." 400 people fell completely silent. Before we hear what she sang, before we tell you what happened when she opened her mouth and let out that first note, we need to go back 3 weeks. We need to tell you how a woman who scrubs floors at night ended up on a stage in front of the richest people in Boston. We need to tell you what Julian Ashford did not know about his own father. And we need to tell you about a sealed letter, hidden in a safe for 40 years, that would change everything after the last note faded. If this beginning already has your heart racing, do us a small kindness. Would you tap that subscribe button right now, share this story with someone who needs to hear that kindness always wins, and tell us in the comments where you would run to if 400 strangers laughed at you? Your voice in that comments section is what keeps stories like this one alive. Do not scroll away. Stay with us. What Nia does next is only the beginning. Now let us rewind. 3 weeks before that night, Nia Whitfield was standing at a bus stop on Huntington Avenue at 4:30 in the morning, waiting for the number 39 to take her home. It was late October in Boston, and the sky over the Fenway was still black, and her breath came out in short white clouds. She wore her red winter coat over her sky blue uniform, and she carried a paper sack with 2 apples in it, because the executive kitchens on the 47th floor of Ashford Tower always had a fruit bowl at the end of the shift, and the day supervisor let the night cleaners take whatever was left. The apples were for Corinne, her 14-year-old sister. Corinne would be waking up in 1 hour to go to school, and she loved a sliced apple with peanut butter before the bus. Nia's back hurt. Her feet hurt. Her fingers were stiff around the paper sack. She was thinking about the electric bill on the kitchen counter and the winter coat Corinne would need in 3 weeks and the sound of her mother's voice from a long time ago, singing an old song about a river. She did not know it yet, but somewhere upstairs in the tower behind her, Julian Ashford had just left a board meeting at 4 in the morning holding a folder full of numbers that did not add up. She did not know that a man named Preston Vance had already noticed her, and had already begun to plan. She only knew that the bus was late, that the apples were good ones this time, and that her sister was waiting at home. The apartment on the 3rd floor of a red brick walk-up in Roxbury had 2 bedrooms, 1 small living room, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at the same time. Nia rented it for $1,100 a month, which was more than she could afford, but it was 3 blocks from Corinne's magnet school and 1 block from the T-stop, and Nia had promised her mother that Corinne would stay in that school no matter what. The morning after her shift, Nia came in through the front door at 5:15, hung her red coat on the hook, set the apples on the counter, and went straight to Corinne's room. Corinne was already sitting up in bed with her yellow hoodie pulled over her pajamas, a science textbook open on her lap. Her braids were tied back with a green scrunchie. She looked up when Nia opened the door and gave the small, tired smile that 14-year-olds give their older sisters at 5 in the morning. "You brought apples," she said. "2 of them," Nia said. "Big ones. Get in the kitchen." They sat at the little folding table by the window while Nia sliced the apples and spread peanut butter on each slice. Corinne told her about the science test she had that day. Nia listened and nodded and drank a cup of black coffee that was mostly water. Outside the window, the sky was starting to turn the pale gray blue of early morning, and a garbage truck rolled slowly down the street. "Nia," Corinne said, "there's a flyer at school. For a music camp. In July. It's at Berkeley." Nia set her coffee cup down. "How much?" $1,200. "But there's a scholarship. If you audition you can get it." "I already learned the audition song." Nia looked at her sister. Corinne had a voice. Not the same as Nia's, but a bright, clean soprano that came out of her chest without any effort at all, the way water comes out of a fountain. Their mother had noticed it when Corinne was 6. Their mother had said, one time, that Corinne would sing on a real stage one day, and that Nia would be the one to put her there. "Sing it for me," Nia said. Corinne stood up next to the folding table in her yellow hoodie and her striped pajama pants, closed her eyes, and sang the first 2 verses of an old spiritual. She did not miss a note. When she finished, Nia set her coffee down and reached across the table and took her sister's hand. "You are going to that camp," she said. "I promise you." Corinne squeezed her hand and did not answer, because she was a smart girl and she knew what promises like that cost. By 7 Nia had walked Corinne to the bus stop, come back to the apartment, and lay down on the couch in her uniform. She slept until noon. Then she got up, showered, ate a bowl of oatmeal, and started her real work, which was studying. Nia was 2 classes away from a bachelor's degree in music education. She had left the conservatory 10 years ago when her mother got sick, but she had kept taking 1 online class at a time at the community college. Her plan, the plan she had carried in her head every night on the number 39 bus for the last 6 years, was to finish the degree, get a job as a middle school music teacher, and move Corinne into a 2-bedroom apartment closer to the school. That was it. That was the whole plan. The idea of singing again for anyone else, the idea of standing on a real stage, had been packed away in a box in the back of her mind so long that she rarely opened the lid anymore. That afternoon, at 3 o'clock, she caught the T back to Ashford Tower for her night shift. Ashford Tower was 52 stories of glass and pale stone on the edge of the financial district. The lobby had white marble floors, tall glass elevators, and a security desk staffed by 2 guards. Nia entered through the service door on the side, badged in, and rode the freight elevator up to floor 47, which was the executive floor of Ashford Holdings. Her partner on the floor was a woman named Rita Delacroix, a 50-year-old Haitian-American woman with a bright green head wrap and a laugh that filled every hallway she walked down. Rita had trained Nia when Nia started, and had told her, on the first night, 3 rules. Never touch anything on the desks, Rita had said. Never open a drawer. And when you see Mr. Ashford in the hallway, you say good evening and you keep moving, because he will always say good evening back, and you do not want to be the reason his elevator is late. Nia had followed those rules for 3 years. In 3 years she had said good evening to Mr. Ashford exactly 17 times, and he had said good evening back to her every single time. That night, at 11:15, she said it for the 18th time. He was walking out of the boardroom holding a red folder, his navy suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie slightly loose. He looked up when he saw her push her cart around the corner. "Good evening, Miss Whitfield," he said. His voice was tired. "Good evening, Mr. Ashford," she said, and she kept moving. At 1 in the morning her cart hit a bad wheel and started dragging. At 2 she took her lunch break in the small staff room on the 47th floor and ate the peanut butter sandwich she had made for herself that afternoon. At 3:30 she finished the executive kitchen, wiped down the counters, put 2 of the apples in her paper sack, and rode the freight elevator down. The parking garage at Ashford Tower had 3 levels below ground. Nia usually walked straight through the 2nd level to the exit ramp to catch her bus. That night, halfway to the ramp, she heard a car engine trying to turn over and failing. Once. Twice. 3 times. She looked to her left. In space B14, a black sedan was sitting with its interior light on and its hood up, and Julian Ashford was leaning on the front fender with his phone to his ear, saying, "I understand, but the tow truck cannot possibly take an hour. I have a meeting at 7. Nia hesitated. Rule number 3, keep moving. Then she thought about the fact that it was 3:30 in the morning, and the man was standing alone in a parking garage in a wool overcoat, and the tow truck was an hour out. She walked over. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "I have jumper cables in my locker. If your battery is dead, I can help you." He turned and looked at her. In the flat white light of the garage, she saw him really see her for the first time in 3 years. He saw the sky blue uniform. He saw the paper sack with the apples in it. He saw her tired eyes and her calm, straight mouth. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "you would do that." "Yes, sir," she said. "It is not a problem." 10 minutes later Nia had the cables clipped to his battery, and her own little Honda pulled up beside his sedan, and the sedan coughed and roared to life on the second try. Julian Ashford stood in the cold and watched her unclip the cables and coil them neatly. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "please let me pay you for your time." "No, sir," she said. "Anyone would have done the same. Please have a good morning." She got into her Honda and drove home. She did not know that Julian Ashford stood in that garage for another 2 minutes after she left, watching her taillights, and thinking about the fact that in 3 years he had never asked a single person on his cleaning staff how they were doing. She also did not know that on the security camera above Space B14, Preston Vance, watching the feed from his office on the 50th floor at 3:45 in the morning, had leaned forward, tilted his head, and started to smile. Preston Vance was the head of public relations at Ashford Holdings, and he had been the head of public relations at Ashford Holdings for 12 years. He was 43 years old. He wore tan blazers over pressed white shirts, kept his hair slicked back with too much product, and had a corner office on the 50th floor with a view of the harbor. Preston believed 2 things above all else. The first was that appearances were the only thing that mattered in business. The second was that Julian Ashford, who had inherited Ashford Holdings from his father when he was 26, was a soft man who needed a hard man like Preston Vance to protect the brand from Julian's own kind heart. Preston had watched the parking garage footage 3 times before he turned it off. Then he called his assistant into his office. "Pull the personnel file on the night cleaner from floor 47, he said. "The one who jumped his car." "Sir," his assistant said, "may I ask why?" "Because," Preston said, "our CEO is developing a fondness for the help, and I would prefer that the annual gala not be a place where he decides to make that fondness public. I would prefer that the annual gala remind everyone, including him, that there is a very clear line between the people who pay for the champagne and the people who pour it." The assistant, whose name was Grace and who had 2 children in daycare, did not ask any more questions. She pulled Nia Whitfield's file. Preston read the file at his desk that afternoon while eating a chicken salad sandwich. Nia Whitfield, 28, single, guardian of 1 minor sibling, 3 years with Ashford Building Services, no complaints, 1 commendation from the executive floor supervisor. A former scholarship student at the New England Conservatory, class of 2014, withdrew in her 3rd year for family reasons. Preston read that last line twice. Then he closed the folder and made his plan. The Ashford Foundation Gala was 2.5 weeks away. It was the biggest social event on the Ashford calendar, 400 guests, black tie, a small stage for a violinist and 2 speeches, and a printed program that included a portion called guest performance, which was a running joke among the staff because the guests never actually performed. The guest performance section had contained the same line for 6 years, a surprise appearance from a special friend of the foundation. Preston had written that line himself the first year, expecting to book a celebrity. He never had. It stayed on the program every year because he refused to admit he had failed to fill it. That afternoon, Preston did 3 things. First, he had Grace print a stack of gilded gala invitations, the same as the ones sent to the guests. He instructed her to leave 1 blank. Second, he walked down to Julian's office on the 51st floor and asked Julian to sign a batch of routine paperwork, the way he did every Friday. He slid the blank invitation into the middle of the stack. Julian, who had spent the entire morning on the phone with an outside forensic auditor named Delia Monroe about a set of foundation accounts that seemed to be leaking money, signed the whole stack without looking up. Third, Preston filled in the invitation with Nia Whitfield's name and home address, added a printed note that read, "You have been personally selected by Mr. Julian Ashford as our featured guest performance for the 2025 Ashford Foundation Gala," and dropped it in the mailroom outgoing bin. He did not tell Julian anything. He was thinking about a foundation account labeled Youth Music Outreach, Northeast, that had received $42 million over the last 6 years, and had, according to Delia Monroe's preliminary numbers, funded exactly 11 scholarships and 1 summer camp that no one at the foundation could remember approving. He was thinking about the fact that the check signatures on the outgoing wires all belonged to his CFO, Bennett Cole, a man his father had hired in 1992 and had always called our steadiest hand. He was thinking about his father, Harrison Ashford, who had died 2 years ago and left him this company and this ballroom and this problem, and who had once told him, when Julian was 12, that the only thing worth building was a company that treated the person cleaning the floor with the same respect as the person signing the wire. Julian rubbed his eyes. He looked at his phone. He thought, without knowing exactly why, about the woman in the sky blue uniform who had jumped his car in the parking garage and refused to take any money. He asked Grace to send Delia Monroe up to his office first thing Monday morning. He also did one small thing he had not done in 3 years of being CEO. He walked down to the 51st floor security desk on his way out that night, looked at the log of the badge scanner for the executive floor, and asked the guard who worked the night shift when the cleaning crew came through. 2 in the morning, sir, the guard said. Miss Rita and Miss Nia. Every night. They are very quiet. You would not know they had been through unless you looked at the trash bins. Miss Nia, Julian said. That is Miss Whitfield. Yes, sir. 3 years now. Julian nodded. He thanked the guard. He rode the elevator down to the parking garage. He passed space B14 and slowed just enough to look at it. He had had a new battery installed the morning after the jump. The mechanic had told him the old one had been dying for 6 months and he was lucky it had lasted the winter. Julian had not said anything at the time. Now, standing in the flat white light of the garage, he thought about the fact that a woman on his cleaning crew had opened her locker for him in the middle of the night and had refused a tip because anyone would have done the same. He was not sure anyone would have. He walked to his car and drove home. He did not know that Preston Vance had just used his signature to mail an invitation. He did not know that the woman in the sky blue uniform had just opened her mailbox on a red brick walk-up in Roxbury and was staring at a gilded envelope with her name on it. He did not know that Delia Monroe, at that very moment, was sitting at her own kitchen table in Newton with her laptop open and a cup of tea beside her, printing out the fourth wire receipt she had found from the Youth Music Outreach account, and that on the printout was the name of a shell company registered in Delaware whose sole officer was listed as a man named Bennett Cole Jr., and that the discovery of that document was the exact thread that would, in 3 weeks and 1 day, put Bennett Cole in federal court. He did not know any of it. He just drove home in the dark, past the bright windows of the city, thinking about a woman in a sky blue uniform and a father he still missed and a company he was trying to keep honest. The envelope was heavy in her hand. It was the color of pale butter with gold edges, and her name was printed on the front in a slanted script that looked like it had been done by a person who was paid by the hour to write names in slanted script. Miss Nia Whitfield. She stood in the small vestibule at the bottom of the walk-up, one hand on the mailbox door, the other on the envelope. It had been a long day. Corinne was upstairs doing homework. Nia had 1 hour before she had to leave for her shift. She opened it standing there. She read the note twice. She read it a third time. Then she went upstairs slowly, holding the envelope in front of her with 2 hands, the way you carry a plate of something hot. "Corinne," she said, "come out here a minute." Corinne came out of her room in her yellow hoodie with a pencil behind her ear. She read the note over Nia's shoulder. Then she sat down on the couch. "Guest performance," Corinne said. "That is what it says. Personally selected by Mr. Julian Ashford. That is what it says." They looked at each other. "I jumped his car in the garage last week," Nia said. "That is the only time I have ever really talked to him." "You jumped his car?" "With the cables from my locker." Corinne looked at the invitation. Then she looked at her sister. She was 14, but she had grown up in a house where a lot of decisions had to be made at kitchen tables by tired people, and she had opinions. "Nia," she said, "you have to go." "Corinne. You have to go. If he invited you, he invited you. Rich people do not send gold envelopes by accident. Rich people do a lot of things by accident. He asked you to sing. Nia. That is a real stage." Nia sat down next to her sister. She held the invitation on her knees. She thought about the last time she had sung on a stage. It had been 10 years ago, at a spring recital at the conservatory. She had sung an aria from Mozart, and she had gotten a standing ovation. 2 weeks later her mother had called her from the hospital, and Nia had left school the next morning, and she had not sung in front of a paying audience since. "Corinne," she said, "I do not know if I can still do it." "Yes you can. It has been 10 years. You sing in the kitchen. That is different." "It is not different. It is your voice. You still have it." Nia looked at her sister. She thought about the flyer for the music camp at Berkeley. She thought about the $1,200. She thought about the fact that Julian Ashford, the CEO of the entire company, was inviting her to a room full of the wealthiest people in Boston, and that if she went, and if she was brave enough, she could look him in the eye and ask about a scholarship for her sister. That was the moment she decided. She decided not because she wanted to sing. She decided because she had spent 3 years walking past that man in the hallway with her cart, saying good evening, and never asking for anything, and now for the first time she had been given a way to ask. She would go. She would sing. She would ask. And if Mr. Ashford, or anyone else in that ballroom, decided to laugh at her, she would stand still and let them, and she would ask anyway. She looked at Corinne. "I will go," she said. "But you have to promise me something." "What?" "If I fall apart on that stage, if the whole thing goes wrong, you do not stop trying. Not for the camp. Not for the music. Not for any of it. You keep going. That is the promise." Corinne nodded. She reached over and took the invitation out of Nia's hands and set it on the coffee table like it was a bird. "Deal," she said. That night on the number 39 bus, Nia sat by the window and thought. Here is a question for you before we go on. If a golden invitation showed up in your mailbox tomorrow from the person who signs your paycheck, and it asked you to stand on a stage in front of 400 strangers who might laugh you off it, would you go? Would you take the chance for the one person in your life you love most, even if it cost you every piece of pride you had left? Tell us in the comments what you would do. And if you have not yet, please subscribe, because Nia's story only gets bigger from here, and we are just getting to the part where the real twist begins. There was a long quiet moment. Then Professor Hearth made a small sound, part laugh, part breath, that she had heard him make once at a masterclass when a student finally landed a phrase that had been fighting them for weeks. "Nia," he said. "I have been waiting 10 years for this call. Where are you? Are you in town?" "Yes, sir." "Are you singing again?" "I have a chance to sing on Saturday. In front of a large audience." "I have not sung anything in front of anyone in 10 years, Professor. I do not know if I am going to make it through the piece. I need help." "Which piece?" "Ave Maria. Schubert. Your mother's aria." "Yes, sir." She could hear him smiling on the other end of the line. "Come to the 4th floor practice chapel tomorrow at 6, he said. "Bring water. Bring the score. Bring a coat you do not mind lying on the floor in. We will begin." She said thank you and hung up and stood for a long moment holding the paper cup of coffee against her chest, watching the steam rise, watching Boston walk by outside the bakery window. A woman with 2 small children pushed a stroller past the door. A young man in a delivery jacket wheeled a hand truck of bread boxes down the sidewalk. The world had not changed. Only she had. She walked home. She hung the folder of sheet music on the hook by the door. She looked at the invitation on the coffee table. She was going to be ready. The dress came from a thrift store on Newbury Street called Second Wind. It was a cobalt blue floor-length gown with a modest neckline, cap sleeves, and a small satin sash at the waist. It had been marked down twice. The tag said $79. Nia paid $62 with a coupon. She hung it on the back of Corinne's door and stared at it for a full minute. "That is the color of the sky at noon in July," Corinne said from the couch. "That is a stage dress." "That is a hopeful dress," Nia said. "Same thing." That week, in the 10 days leading up to the gala, 3 things happened at the same time in 3 different parts of the city. The first thing happened at the New England Conservatory. Nia had called her old voice teacher, Professor Elias Hearth, on a Tuesday afternoon. Professor Hearth was 73, retired from full-time teaching, but still coming into the conservatory 3 days a week to work with a handful of former students. He wore a green cardigan every day of his life and he had a voice like a cello that had been played in a warm room. "Nia," he said on the phone, "I have been waiting 10 years for this call." She almost cried in the bus shelter where she was standing. They met on Thursday evening in the small chapel practice room on the 4th floor. Nia stood in the middle of the room in her red winter coat and her jeans, and Professor Hearth sat at the small upright piano in his green cardigan, and he played the opening bars of Ave Maria, and she opened her mouth and let out the first note. It was a rough note. It cracked. She stopped and put her hand on her chest. "Nia," Professor Hearth said, "sit down." She sat. "You have been holding your breath for 10 years, he said. "Your body has forgotten that it is allowed to let air out. We are going to fix that. Not tonight. Tonight we will breathe. Tomorrow we will sing. Are you willing?" "Yes, sir." "Then we begin." They worked for 2 hours. He did not let her sing more than 4 notes in a row. He made her breathe, and then he made her breathe again, and then he made her lie down on the floor of the practice room in her red coat and put a hardcover book on her belly and breathe until the book went up and down without her thinking about it. At the end of the 2 hours he sat down next to her on the floor with his knees creaking, and he looked at her, and he said, "The voice is still there. It has been waiting for you. Come back tomorrow at 6. She came back tomorrow at 6. She came back every day for 10 days. By the second week she was singing full phrases without stopping. By the 4th day of the second week she was singing the entire Ave Maria from start to finish in the practice room, and Professor Hearth was sitting at the piano with tears standing in his eyes, and he was pretending they were not there. The second thing happened on the 50th floor of Ashford Tower. Delia Monroe arrived at Julian Ashford's office on Monday morning at 8 sharp, wearing a burgundy pantsuit and carrying 2 file boxes. She was 63 years old. Her hair was silver, her posture was straight, and she had spent 40 years as a forensic auditor for foundations and family trusts. She had also served for 25 years on the scholarship board of the New England Conservatory, though she did not mention that at their first meeting. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "the youth music outreach account has been used as a personal slush fund for the last 6 years. The wires go to 4 shell entities registered in Delaware. 3 of the shells are owned by a holding company that traces back to Mr. Bennett Cole. The 4th I am still working on. I have the paper. I have the signatures. I have the bank records. I would like to bring a securities lawyer into this conversation by Friday." Julian sat very still behind his desk. "How much?" he said. 26 million confirmed. Possibly closer to 30 when I finish." "Do it," he said. "Bring the lawyer. Bring the auditor's report. I want it clean. I want it in court, not in a hallway." "Yes, sir." "Ms. Monroe," he said, "I am also going to need your help with one other thing. This gala on Saturday. I want to make sure the foundation announcement I am making that night about restructuring the outreach account is airtight. I do not want Bennett Cole to see it coming until the board vote." "Understood." They worked for 4 hours. When Delia Monroe left his office at noon she paused at the door and looked back at him. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "your father was a good man. He hired me 30 years ago when nobody else would hire a black woman auditor with a certificate but no big firm. I have not forgotten. What you are doing here, in this room, right now, is the exact thing he would have done." Julian nodded. He did not trust his voice enough to answer. The third thing happened in Preston Vance's office on the same day. Preston had watched Nia Whitfield's badge log for a week. He had noticed that she had not called out, had not asked any questions, and had not tried to contact Julian's office. He had assumed she would either not come, or would come in something borrowed and shabby that would embarrass her before she even reached the microphone. He decided to add one more small touch. He called the events coordinator and told her that the guest performance segment should be introduced with a specific line, written by him personally, that the coordinator was to read from the stage. The line went like this. "And now, for our guest performance, please give a warm welcome to Miss Nia Whitfield, our very own cleaning staff, personally invited to the gala tonight by our beloved CEO as a fun little charity surprise." The events coordinator, whose name was Rosalind, read the line twice and asked Preston if he was sure. "I wrote it," Preston said. "Read it as written." Rosalind, who needed her job, said yes. On Saturday morning Nia woke up at 7, drank 1 cup of coffee, ate half a piece of toast, and stood in the small living room of her apartment in a cobalt blue dress. Corinne pinned a small silver clip in her hair. Then Corinne stepped back, looked at her sister, and put both hands over her own mouth. "Oh," Corinne said. "Nia. Do I look all right?" "You look like Mama." Nia held her breath for a second. She looked at herself in the small mirror by the door. She saw her mother's cheekbones and her mother's eyes and her mother's mouth. "Then I am ready," she said. At 6 that evening, she got in a car that Professor Hearth had insisted on paying for, and she rode across Boston to the Ashford Tower Ballroom, with the folded score of Ave Maria in her purse and the sound of her mother's voice singing in her head. The Ashford Ballroom took up the entire 52nd floor of the tower. Its ceiling was 30 feet high, its walls were pale cream with tall windows on 3 sides, and its floor was polished white marble. On gala nights the room glowed in cool white light from the chandelier, the wall sconces, and the tall pillar candles on every round table. Preston Vance had insisted on cool white lighting from the day he took over the gala. He said it made the champagne look more expensive. Nia walked in through the main doors at 7:15. A young woman at the check-in table looked at her invitation, looked at her cobalt blue dress, looked at her face, and stood up straighter. "Miss Whitfield," she said, "you are seated at table 14. Your guest performance segment is at 8:45. "Thank you," Nia said. She walked into the ballroom. The first thing she did was look for Julian Ashford. She saw him at the head table by the stage, standing with a tall silver-haired woman in a burgundy pantsuit. He was in a navy suit and a maroon tie. He was leaning down to listen to something the woman was saying. He had not looked up. The second thing she did was look for Preston Vance. She spotted him near the bar, in the same tan blazer he wore every day, holding a glass of scotch and talking to 2 men she did not recognize. He saw her from across the room. His face did not move, but his eyes narrowed slightly, and then he turned back to the men. The third thing she did was sit down at table 14 and drink 1 full glass of ice water. The other people at table 14 were 3 older couples and 1 young woman in a gold dress. They said hello politely. The young woman in the gold dress looked at Nia's cobalt gown and said, "That is a beautiful color on you." "Thank you," Nia said. "It was my grandmother's favorite." The young woman smiled. Nia smiled back. For the next hour Nia ate small bites of the first course, a green salad with pears, and drank more water, and listened to the string quartet playing quietly on the small stage. She kept her hands in her lap. She kept her back straight. She thought about Professor Hearth lying on the floor of the practice room, and the book on her belly, and the way the air had felt going out and coming back in. At 8:30 Julian Ashford stood up and walked to the stage. He gave a short speech about the Ashford Foundation, about the work it did with music education in underserved communities in the Northeast, and about the fact that in the coming year he would be personally restructuring the Foundation's largest grant program to make sure that every dollar reached a real student. He said the words, "full public audit," out loud. He said them looking directly at a 50-year-old man at table 1, a tall man in a charcoal suit with a gold watch, who did not blink but whose jaw tightened. That man was Bennett Cole. Delia Monroe, seated at the head table, watched Bennett Cole's jaw tighten and made a small note on her phone. Julian finished his speech to warm applause. He stepped down. The event coordinator, Rosalind, walked to the microphone. Nia felt her chest lift and settle. It was time. Rosalind adjusted the microphone. She looked at the small card in her hand. She looked at Preston Vance at the bar, who was watching her. She read the line as written. "And now, for our guest performance, please give a warm welcome to Miss Nia Whitfield, our very own cleaning staff, personally invited to the gala tonight by our beloved CEO as a fun little charity surprise." Rosalind's voice cracked on the word, surprise. For a second the ballroom was quiet. Then, at table 5, a man with a red face laughed. At table 9, 2 women laughed. At the bar, Preston Vance smiled around his glass of scotch. The laughter spread the way it had in Chapter 1. It rolled across the marble floor. It got into every table. Some people did not laugh, but they smiled uncertainly, or looked at their plates, or looked at the head table for guidance. At the head table Julian Ashford went completely still. He looked at Rosalind. He looked at the small card in her hand. He looked at Preston Vance at the bar, and his grey eyes went very cold. Delia Monroe, next to him, put one hand very lightly on his forearm. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Watch." At table 14 Nia stood up. She smoothed the front of her cobalt blue dress. She reached down and picked up her small purse. She took the folded score of Ave Maria out of the purse. She placed the purse back on her chair. She looked at the young woman in the gold dress next to her, who was staring at her with two hands over her mouth. "Thank you for the compliment on the dress," Nia said softly. "I hope you enjoy the song." Then she walked to the stage. She did not hurry. She did not slow down. She walked at the same steady pace she used pushing a cart down a hallway at 2 in the morning. Her rubber-soled shoes had been replaced with a pair of simple black flats from the same thrift store, and they made almost no sound on the marble. The laughter began to die around her the way the laughter in Chapter 1 had died, because a woman who does not run from laughter is a woman that laughter cannot hold. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage. She walked past Rosalind, who was still holding the card and looked like she wanted to disappear into it. She reached the podium. She unfolded the score, smoothed it, and placed it flat. She looked out at 400 people. At the head table Julian Ashford was on his feet, one hand on the back of his chair, the other flat on the table. Delia Monroe had not moved. Nia leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Nia Whitfield, and if you will let me, I would like to sing you one song." 400 people fell completely silent. The string quartet on the side of the stage looked at each other. The cellist, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, lifted her bow. "Ave Maria," Nia said to them. "The Schubert." The cellist nodded. Nia closed her eyes. She thought about her mother in the kitchen of the old apartment in Chicago, singing this song over a pot of chicken soup while a small girl with braids sat at the counter and drew hearts on a piece of paper. She thought about her grandmother Ruby, who had once run a diner on the South Side and had fed hungry people for free out of the back window. She thought about Corinne, sitting on the couch at home in her yellow hoodie, refreshing her phone. She opened her mouth. She sang the first note. The first note was a low, warm G. It was not loud. It was not showy. It was the sound of a door opening in a house full of people who had been sitting in silence for a long time and had forgotten what a door sounded like. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the stage at the same moment. At table 5, the red-faced man who had laughed first put his glass of wine down without looking at the table. It missed the coaster. Nobody noticed. At table 1, Bennett Cole leaned forward 2 inches. At the head table, Julian Ashford's hand slid off the back of his chair and hung at his side. Nia sang the second note, and the third, and the whole first phrase, and the string quartet came in under her with a soft chord that was barely there. Her voice was not the voice of a 28-year-old woman who cleaned floors for a living. It was the voice of a woman who had been trained by good teachers in a good school, and had been quiet for 10 years, and had come back with all of that silence packed into every note. Every syllable of the Latin came out round and clear. Ave Maria, gratia plena. Every consonant landed like a small stone dropped into still water. The room stopped breathing. By the middle of the first verse the woman in the gold dress at table 14 was crying. By the end of the first verse 3 older men at table 7 were crying. By the second verse Rosalind, the event coordinator, was sitting on the small step at the side of the stage with her hand over her mouth, and Preston Vance was still standing at the bar with his glass of scotch, but the smile was gone, and his face had turned a shade of white that did not belong on a living person. Nia opened her eyes on the second verse. She looked out at the ballroom. She saw 400 people crying. She saw men who had made billions of dollars in real estate wiping their faces with linen napkins. She saw women with diamonds around their necks holding hands with their husbands. She saw waiters standing perfectly still along the wall, trays in their hands, not moving. She saw Julian Ashford at the head table, staring at her, one hand pressed flat over his heart the way a person presses a hand over a wound. She did not stop singing. She sang the ending of the aria the way Professor Hart had taught her that week. She lifted the last high note, held it clean for 4 full beats, and brought it back down slowly, softly, into the low note the way you set a sleeping child into a crib. Then it was done. For a long 5 seconds there was no sound at all. Then the young woman in the gold dress at table 14 stood up and started to clap, one clap at a time, and then table 7 stood up, and then the bar staff dropped their trays and clapped, and then every single person in the ballroom, including Bennett Cole, including Preston Vance, was standing on their feet and clapping, and half of them were still crying. The applause lasted almost 3 minutes. Nia stood at the podium in her cobalt blue dress with her hands folded in front of her. She waited for the noise to soften. When it did, she leaned into the microphone one more time. "Thank you," she said. "That song was my mother's favorite. She died 10 years ago. I have not sung it in front of anyone since. Thank you for letting me." Then she folded the score, tucked it under her arm, walked off the stage, down the 3 steps, and back toward table 14. She did not make it to her chair. Julian Ashford met her halfway across the ballroom floor. He stopped about 3 feet in front of her. The room was very quiet again. Every eye was on them. He looked, at that moment, like a man who had never in his life been so aware of how much space he took up. "Miss Whitfield," he said, and his voice was rough. "I owe you an apology so large that I do not know where to begin." "Sir," she said, "you do not owe me anything." "I do," he said. "I did not know what was on that card. I did not know what Preston Vance had written. I did not know that my signature was on that invitation. And I promise you, tonight, in front of this room, I am going to fix every part of what was done to you." He turned to the ballroom. 400 faces looked back at him. "May I introduce Miss Nia Whitfield," he said. "She is the finest singer I have ever heard in this building. And I do not include the London Symphony we hosted last April." The laughter that broke out this time was very different from the laughter earlier in the evening. It was soft, and warm, and rueful, and it came from people who understood, all at once, that they had been part of something ugly and were being given a chance to be part of something better instead. They clapped again. Nia stood very still. Julian offered her his arm. She took it, gently, and he walked her back to table 14 and pulled out her chair. Then he walked to the head table. He did not sit down. He picked up his water glass, tapped it lightly with a spoon, and looked at Preston Vance at the bar. "Mr. Vance," Julian said calmly, "please come to my office at 9 tomorrow morning. Bring your keycard, your building pass, your company laptop, and a written explanation of everything you have done tonight. Ms. Monroe will be present. Legal will be present. You will not be present at this company after that meeting." Preston Vance opened his mouth, then closed it. He set his glass of scotch on the bar. He walked out of the ballroom without a word, past 2 security guards who followed him at a respectful distance to make sure he collected his coat and left the building. Julian looked at Bennett Cole at table 1. "Mr. Cole," he said, in the same calm voice, "the board is meeting on Monday morning. Ms. Monroe will be presenting her preliminary findings on the youth music outreach account. I would encourage you to bring your own lawyer." Bennett Cole did not answer. His jaw was very tight. Julian sat down. Delia Monroe, next to him, quietly picked up her own napkin and dabbed at the corner of her eye, and no one at the head table pretended not to see. At table 14 the young woman in the gold dress leaned over and touched Nia's sleeve. "I do not know your whole story," she said, "but I hope somebody in this room is smart enough to make sure the world hears you sing again." "Thank you," Nia said. Someone was. At the head table Delia Monroe had already opened her phone and was writing an email to the president of the New England Conservatory. The email had 3 lines. It said that a former student of theirs had just walked into a Boston ballroom and reduced 400 people to tears in 3 minutes with an unaccompanied Schubert, and that the conservatory should call Delia Monroe at 7 the next morning to discuss what came next. She sent the email at 8:57 in the evening. She got a reply at 9:02. At the end of the gala, when the last guests were putting on their coats and the waiters were clearing plates, Delia Monroe walked to table 14 and sat down next to Nia. "Miss Whitfield," she said, "my name is Delia Monroe. I served on the scholarship board of the New England Conservatory from 1999 to 2023. I recognize your face. I read your application in 2010. I voted to give you a full 4-year scholarship, along with every other member of the board. I am so glad you sang tonight." Nia looked at her. She remembered the letter. The letter had come in a plain white envelope, and her mother had cried when she opened it, and they had eaten pancakes for dinner to celebrate. "You are on that board," she said. "I was," Delia said. "I am on other boards now. Miss Whitfield, would you be willing to come to Mr. Ashford's office tomorrow at 10 in the morning? Bring your sister. There is something we need to tell you both, and it should be told with your sister in the room." "Ma'am," Nia said, "what is it?" Delia looked at her. For the first time that evening, Delia Monroe looked older and softer, like a grandmother sitting on a porch late at night. "It is about your grandmother," she said. "It is about a diner she owned in Chicago in 1983. And it is about a young white man from Boston who almost died in a blizzard on the sidewalk in front of that diner, and a woman named Ruby Whitfield who brought him inside." Nia's hands went cold. She had heard that story her whole childhood. Her grandmother Ruby had told it every year at Thanksgiving. A boy of 19, blue-lipped and shaking, half frozen on the sidewalk on the coldest night of the year. Ruby had gone out with her coat and pulled him inside, sat him by the radiator, given him a bowl of chili and a piece of cornbread, and stuffed a $20 bill in his hand for the bus fare he needed to get to a job interview the next morning. He had cried at the counter. He had promised to pay her back one day. He had never come back. Ruby had always said, at the end of the story, "I did not need him to come back. I needed him to remember." And then she would look at Nia and Corinne and their mother and she would say, "That is how we do it in this family. We do the kind thing whether or not it comes back to us. You hear me?" Nia had heard her. "That boy," Nia said carefully. "That boy in the diner. His name was Harrison Ashford," Delia said. "He got on the bus the next morning. He made the interview. He got the job. He built Ashford Holdings. He named his son Julian. And he spent 30 years trying to find your grandmother, and could not, because she moved twice and never left a phone number and never wanted to be found." Nia sat very still. "He kept a letter for her in his personal safe," Delia said. "He wrote it in 1985. He addressed it to Ruby Whitfield, care of Whitfield's Diner, Chicago. When the diner closed in 1987 he could not send it. He never opened it again. He left instructions in his will that it be delivered to the Whitfield family the day the Ashford family found them. Mr. Ashford's father died 2 years ago. The letter is still in the safe. I have known it was there for 6 months. I did not know, until you sang tonight and I saw your face and heard your name, that the family was you." Nia put her hand over her mouth. At the head table Julian Ashford was watching from a distance, because Delia had asked him to give her a moment. But now Delia raised one hand slightly, and he crossed the room to them. He sat down across from Nia. He took a breath. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "My father spoke about your grandmother twice a year for as long as I can remember. He said that on the coldest night of his life, a black woman in Chicago fed him for free and gave him bus fare and did not ask for anything back. He said that everything I ever had was built on the $20 in her hand. He looked for her every year. He would not have made it to 20 if she had not opened that door. Nia looked at him. She thought about all of the things her grandmother had said. She thought about the fact that this had all been true, that her grandmother had actually saved a boy from freezing, that the boy had actually grown up to build a tower, that the tower she had been cleaning at night for 3 years was the tower that had been built out of her own grandmother's kindness. She could have laughed. She could have cried. She could have said any number of things. What she said was very simple. My grandmother would have been happy, she said, to know that boy made it home. Julian Ashford did not answer for a long moment. When he did, his voice was low. Miss Whitfield, he said. Please come to the office tomorrow. My father wrote you a letter 40 years ago. It is time we opened it. And there are some other things I would like to say to you and your sister, if you will let me. Yes, sir, she said. I will be there. The next morning, at 10 sharp, Nia and Corinne walked into Julian Ashford's office on the 51st floor. The office was bright with morning light. The walls were pale gray. On the wall behind Julian's desk hung a large black and white photograph of a young man in a cheap suit standing outside a building holding a small brown paper bag. Nia had walked past that photograph on her cart 100 times and had never looked at it. She looked at it now. The young man was Harrison Ashford. In the reflection of the glass door behind him you could just make out the letters of a sign across the street. It was a diner. The sign said, in cursive script, Whitfields. Delia Monroe was already there. So was a lawyer with a leather folder. And on the desk, in the center, sat a small pale envelope, yellowed at the edges, with 3 words written on the front in a young man's careful handwriting. Ruby Whitfield, Chicago. Miss Whitfield, Julian said, would you like to open it? No, sir, Nia said. I would like Corinne to open it. Corinne, in her yellow hoodie and jeans, walked around the desk. She sat down in Julian's chair because Julian had stepped back to give her space. She picked up the envelope in both hands. She turned it over. There was no seal, just a small piece of tape holding the flap down. She peeled it back slowly. Inside were 3 things. A letter, folded in thirds, dated May of 1985. A photograph of Harrison Ashford as a young man, standing outside Whitfield's diner in Chicago, with Ruby herself, in a red apron, smiling next to him. And a certified check, cut in 1985, made out to Ruby Whitfield, in the amount of $100,000, never cashed, never delivered, endorsed in advance to any Whitfield heir or descendant, in perpetuity. Corinne looked up at Nia. Nia looked at Julian. Julian looked at Delia. Delia was smiling. With interest, she said quietly, at 4% compounded annually for 40 years. The lawyer opened his leather folder and slid a printed sheet across the desk. The number at the bottom, in bold, was $480,000. Nia sat down in the chair opposite the desk. Corinne put the check gently back on the envelope. I do not know how to accept this, Nia said quietly. Miss Whitfield, Julian said, my father wanted your family to have it. Please. Accept it with our thanks, not our pity. Your grandmother earned it 40 years ago on a cold night. This is the smallest part of what is owed. Nia looked at Corinne. Corinne, who was 14 and had spent her whole life eating apples for breakfast and doing her homework on the couch, nodded once. Thank you, Nia said. We accept. Monday morning, at 10 sharp, the Ashford Holdings board met in the boardroom on the 51st floor. There were 9 members. Julian Ashford. Delia Monroe, recently appointed as an independent director. 2 long-serving directors from Julian's father's era. 3 outside directors who ran their own companies. 1 representative from the family trust. And Bennett Cole, chief financial officer, who was still on the board because he had not yet been voted off it. Delia Monroe presented her report for 1 hour and 40 minutes. She laid out the wires. She laid out the shell companies. She laid out the paper trail leading from the youth music outreach account to a personal brokerage account in the Cayman Islands. She laid out the signatures. She laid out the pattern going back 6 years and totaling $29,462,000. When she finished, the General Counsel of Ashford Holdings, a soft-spoken woman named Frances Boughton, presented 3 things. First, a written complaint that would be filed that afternoon with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Second, a civil suit against Bennett Cole personally for the return of the funds, with a lien already prepared against his personal residence in Weston and his brokerage accounts, subject to a judge's approval. Third, a motion for immediate removal from the board and termination for cause. The motion passed 8-1. Bennett Cole voted against his own removal. He left the boardroom quietly, with his lawyer, and by the end of the week the criminal complaint had been filed with the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts. By the end of the month a federal grand jury had returned an indictment. By the end of the year Bennett Cole would sit in a federal courtroom in Boston and enter a plea agreement, and would serve his time in a low-security facility in Pennsylvania, and would repay every single dollar he had taken, plus penalties. No one had raised their voice. No one had thrown a punch. No hallway had been shouted in. The whole thing had been handled the way Julian Ashford's father had once told him things ought to be handled in a good company. On paper. In court. In the clear light of a boardroom. While the board was voting, Preston Vance was sitting in a small conference room 2 floors up with his own lawyer and Frances Boughton and a representative from Human Resources. He had been terminated for cause at 9 that morning. His email had been shut off. His keycard had been deactivated. A written report of his behavior at the gala, cross-referenced with the event's coordinator's testimony, had been added to his personnel file. A settlement was offered that included a strict non-disclosure agreement about the details of his separation. Preston, whose lawyer was very good, signed it. He would not work in public relations in Boston again. That afternoon, at 3 o'clock, Julian Ashford asked Grace to bring Nia and Corinne back to his office. They sat in the same chairs as the day before. This time there was no envelope on the desk. This time there was a folder. Julian opened it. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "the Ashford Foundation is being restructured. The Youth Music Outreach Program is being rebuilt from the ground up. Ms. Monroe will be chairing the new committee. She and I would like to name the new program the Ruby Whitfield Music Fellowship. It will provide full 4-year scholarships, living stipends, and career support to 20 music students a year from underserved communities across the Northeast." Nia's eyes filled with tears. She did not wipe them. "I would like to ask you," he went on, "if you would be willing to serve as the founding artistic advisor. The role includes a full salary. It also includes access to a coach and studio time and, if you want it, a performance schedule that fits around your family." "Yes, sir," she said. "I would be honored." He looked at Corinne. "Miss Corinne Whitfield," he said, "the Ruby Whitfield Music Fellowship will be accepting its first class of high school students in June. Auditions are in April. Would you be willing to audition?" Corinne looked at her sister. Nia squeezed her hand. "Yes, sir," Corinne said. "I would." "There is also a summer camp at Berkeley that I have heard about," Julian said. "The foundation will be covering the tuition for any student who applies from the Boston Public Schools. If your school will accept the application, I have already spoken to the director." Nia put one hand on her chest. "Thank you," she said. "We accept." Julian smiled. It was the first real smile Nia had ever seen on his face. "There is one more thing," he said. He slid a small piece of paper across the desk. On it was written the number 480,000 and change, and beside it, the name of a wealth management firm. "This is my father's letter and my father's check," he said. "You take it. All of it. You do with it what your grandmother would have wanted. If you need help, Ms. Monroe knows the right people. If you do not need help, you do not need me." "Thank you," Nia said. "We accept." That night, on the number 39 bus, Nia rode home with Corinne. They sat by the window in the back. Corinne had her head on Nia's shoulder. It was raining outside, the cold October rain that turns Boston streetlights into little blurry stars. "Nia," Corinne said sleepily. "Yes. Are we allowed to be this happy?" Nia thought about it. She thought about her mother in the kitchen. She thought about her grandmother behind the counter of the diner. She thought about the boy in the cheap suit standing outside on the coldest night of the year. "Yes," she said. "We are allowed." They got off the bus at their stop and walked the 2 blocks home under the rain. Corinne held one edge of Nia's red coat over her head. The streetlights made puddles on the sidewalk look like small round mirrors. When they got upstairs to the apartment, Nia turned on the kitchen light and put the kettle on. She hung her red coat by the door. She looked around the small kitchen, at the folding table by the window, at the fruit bowl on the counter with the 2 apples from that morning's shift still in it. She realized, standing there, that she was not going to have to buy the electric bill on the counter with tips and short shifts anymore. She was not going to have to ride the number 39 bus at 4:30 in the morning. She was not going to have to slice apples in the dark because the peanut butter was cheaper than eggs. She started to cry, quietly, standing over the sink. Corinne came up next to her and put a hand on her back and did not say anything, because she was 14 and she had grown up in a house where a lot of hard things had to be swallowed without a word, and she knew when a thing needed to be let out. They sat at the folding table and drank tea. They did not talk about the money. They did not talk about the letter. They talked about the summer camp and about a green dress Corinne had seen in a shop window on Newbury Street and about whether Rita Delacroix would come to the recital. When the tea was gone, Nia washed the mugs and Corinne dried them and put them back on the shelf. Then Nia went into her bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed in her sky blue uniform for the last time, and took the small photograph of her mother off the nightstand. She held it in both hands. "Mama," she said quietly, "the boy came home." She put the photograph back. She went to sleep. Before we go on to the last chapter, we want to say one more thing to you sitting on the other side of the screen. If Nia's story has moved you, if you have felt what she felt tonight when Julian offered his father's promise and she accepted it with both hands, please leave one word in the comments below. One word for the person in your own life who has been quietly carrying too much for too long, the person you love who deserves to have somebody, someday, walk across a room and offer them a check they never asked for and a scholarship they earned 20 years ago. Just one word. And if you have not yet, tap that subscribe button, because the final chapter has a proposal, a wedding, and one last sealed letter that opens the door to a whole new story. Stay with us. 6 months passed. By April, Corinne had won a full scholarship to the Ruby Whitfield Music Fellowship. She sang the same old spiritual she had sung for Nia in the kitchen. The 3 judges cried. One of them was Delia Monroe. By May, Nia had given her first public recital in 10 years, at the New England Conservatory Chapel, a small program of Schubert and Duparc and one gospel piece her mother used to sing. Professor Elias Hart played the piano for her. Julian sat in the front row in a navy suit and a maroon tie. The room held 150 people. There was not a single empty seat. By June, Nia had left Ashford Building Services. Rita Delacroix took her out for dinner on her last night and cried into her salad and made Nia promise she would not become the kind of famous person who forgets her friends. Nia promised. By July, Corinne was at the summer camp at Berkeley. By August, Nia had moved with Corinne into a small bright 2-bedroom apartment in Jamaica Plain with a real music room. She kept her red winter coat in the closet. By September, Julian Ashford was picking her up on Sunday afternoons for long walks through the public garden. By October, on the first bright cool morning of the year, 1 year and 2 weeks after she had signed Ave Maria in the parking garage of Ashford Tower for the first time, Julian took her to the small conservatory garden behind the chapel, the one with the boxwood hedges and the fountain and the white stone bench, and he asked her to sit down. He knelt on the gravel path in front of her. The light in that garden was cool and clean and bright. It was the kind of light that fell straight down onto everything and made every color true. Nia's cobalt blue dress was the color of the sky above them. Julian's tie was the same maroon it had been at the gala. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Nia. I have loved you since the night you sang in my ballroom, and I have loved you more every day since. I do not have my father's letter to offer you, because your family already has it. I do not have my father's check, because your family has cashed it. What I have is myself, and every day I have left, and every good thing I can build. If you will have me, I would like to spend all of it with you. Will you marry me?" Nia looked at him. She thought about her mother. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the $20 bill in the cold hand of a 19-year-old boy in 1983. "Yes," she said. "I will." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a small round diamond in a simple gold band. He had chosen it himself. He had chosen it small on purpose, because he wanted her to be able to wear it while she sang and while she cooked breakfast for Corinne. The wedding was 2 months later, on a cold clear December afternoon, in the same conservatory chapel where Nia had sung her recital. There were 60 guests. Delia Monroe walked Nia down the aisle. Corinne sang, in her yellow winter coat over a green dress, and every single person in the chapel cried. Professor Hearth played the recessional. Rita Delacroix hooted from the fourth pew. At the reception, in a small warm hall next to the chapel, Julian stood up to give a toast. "My father used to say," he said, "that the only thing worth building was a company that treated the person cleaning the floor with the same respect as the person signing the wire. I did not always live up to that. I promise, in front of all of you, that I will spend the rest of my life trying." Everyone clapped. Nia stood up and sang one song. It was the old spiritual her mother used to sing. She sang it with no accompaniment. When she finished, Corinne came up and hugged her, and they stood at the front of the room in each other's arms while 60 people clapped and the December light came through the windows and made everything cool and clean and bright. That night, back at the small bright apartment in Jamaica Plain, after the last guest had gone home, Nia sat down at the kitchen table with Julian. Corinne was asleep on the couch under a green blanket. On the table sat a small brown box. The box had come from Julian's father's safe. It had been marked, in Harrison Ashford's careful handwriting, for the Whitfield family, to be opened when they are ready. They had waited 6 months to open it. Nia lifted the lid. Inside was another envelope. Older than the first. Smaller. Yellowed at the corners. On the front, in the same young hand, was written one line. "For Ruby, to give the girl." Nia stopped breathing for a second. "The girl," she said quietly. Julian looked at her. "Nia," he said, "did your grandmother ever have a child that was not your mother?" Nia sat very still. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the way Ruby had sometimes stood at the window of the diner, late at night, looking out at the street with her arms folded, and how, when Nia was small, she had asked her grandmother what she was looking for, and Ruby had said, "A face I owe an apology to." Ruby had never explained. Nia looked at the envelope. She looked at Julian. She looked at her sister, asleep on the couch, safe, in a warm apartment, with a music scholarship and a red winter coat of her own hanging by the door. "There is another Whitfield," Nia said quietly. "Somewhere. My grandmother had a child before my mother. Nobody in our family has ever known who or where." Julian took her hand. "Then we will find her," he said. "Together." Nia set the envelope down gently on the table. She did not open it yet. Some letters need to be opened at the beginning of a search, not the end of a night. She looked at the small brown box, and the yellowed envelope, and the wedding ring on her finger, and the sister asleep on the couch, and the man across the table with his gray eyes and his maroon tie loose at his throat. Then she smiled. There was, it seemed, one more Whitfield out there in the world, still to be found, still to be brought home. But that, dear friend, is another story.